Hello friends, welcome to another episode of the TFC Audio Project. On this episode of Shop Talk, Mike and I talk about getting back to running. Living in Canada, many people will take a bit of a break from outdoor running during the winter months, and as we approach spring, many will be looking to get outside and start training more regular kilometers. We wanted to review a few elements we feel could really help our patients getting back to running and talk about the opportunity to improve your skill of running or to develop a more robust base every single year when you start getting back to more regular mileage. The goal, develop a sustainable running practice and prevent injuries that we see so commonly in clinic. This episode is sponsored by the TFC Foot Nerd program. It's an online-based education platform that we launched this year to help build a global network of people who understand the body, starting at the feet and the hips, and can help others resolve their problems. The program is also created to expand our TFC instructor team so that we can scale up our seminars and workshops and give more of them around the world each year. February selections have been made, but the next round of applications for the June group will open again in May. Module 1 is available for download online, and it describes why we created the program, what's included, the costs, how to apply, and any other relevant information if you're curious. For more information on that, go to thefootcollective.com and click on the Foot Nerd Program tab. This episode is also sponsored by our travel partner, Nanook Protective Hard Cases, which we use to transport gear and electronics for our seminars and workshops. They make super high quality cases in Canada that keep your electronics safe during travel, and you can check out their cases at nanook.com, Nanuk.com. That's it for sponsors. Hope you enjoy this episode. Let's dig into it.
It's the TFC Audio Project.
It's a collective effort. Help people understand their bodies, starting at the feet are the gateway for people to see that there's an issue. A foot conversation is always a whole body conversation. Hey folks, Nick and Mike back for another episode of Shop Talk. Today's topic is going to be back to running. And, we're in Canada. We're getting to the end of winter. A lot of times people are taking a bit of a break from long mileage and outdoor running during winter, and they're getting back to running soon, within the next month or so. So we figured it'd be a good opportunity to do a podcast about back to running, both applying to people that are getting back outside, but also applying to people that want to either change how they run or anyone looking to get into running. So we want to cover some of the points that we feel are relevant. We've done one on running before, but definitely some stuff to cover today that maybe we didn't speak about in the past. And anyway, we hope it benefits any of the runners out there or any aspiring runners. So like we said, weather's clearing up. People are getting back outside. I'm sure some of, your patients are thinking of getting back outside and starting to ramp up their mileage again. So, when people are getting back to running after kind of a hiatus, a lot of times that hiatus also involves a lot of sitting.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's just not doing the things that would maintain or produce that tissue tolerance to being able to run.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it doesn't even matter if what you were running before. I think that's one of the first things to consider. Let's say you finished with running 10Ks last season, right? Mm-hmm. Just don't put that in your head. Think about starting to build the base back up. Now, for those who have run season after season, it's probably going to be quicker to build back up to that. But for a lot of those who are kind of new to it, just because maybe you started last season or you've got a few seasons under your belt, start from scratch again. And then, we'll talk about the intuitive part of it, building that tolerance back up to the point where you're then keeping track of distances a bit more. But I think you should throw distances out the window for the first little bit as you build the tolerance back up and listen to your actual body.
And especially if last season you had an injury or you're the kind of runner that every single year seems to have these little nagging injuries, whether it's something that actually stops you from running or especially if it's something that affects your training, now is an opportunity. You have this opportunity every year if you took a bit of a break to look back and be like, okay, my goal this year is to not get injured, right? Because it's sustainable running involves developing a resilient, bulletproof body that doesn't constantly get injured because we're not supposed to, So I think injuries or areas of pain are an indicator that, okay, I can improve my running efficiency. And we talk about this all the time, working on the skill of running instead of just going out for a run. These mileage addicts that just care about putting in the miles or the kilometers every single week that their program says they're supposed to do, and caring less about how they're actually moving is really shifting that focus to how you're moving is what makes it so that you don't get injured every year.
Yeah, and I think that it's like anything else. If you get injured in your training, it's very silly. So even if you are training for like a race, maybe there is a race at the end of the summer or whatever, you have a race in mind that you want to train for, at least don't get injured in your training. Right. So it's like a fighter who goes in, like if a fighter breaks his arm in training and can't even fight. It's like, well, what's the point of that? Sense. Maybe you get hurt a little bit in your fight because that's what you've trained for over time. You've trained to develop the resilience to be able to perform at your best when the competition comes. And maybe you overdo it a little bit in the competition. Maybe you consider that okay because that's your competition. You've trained all the way for that. Yeah. But like I said, don't get hurt training for the competition because that's just very silly.
And one thing that one of the first things that we had just kind of mentioned before starting this this episode is intuitive running. Like make the first 6 to 8 weeks of when you're getting back to running kind of intuitive running where you're listening to your body. It's like, okay, it doesn't really matter what, whatever program you're ascribing to or you're trying out this year tells you to run each day. Go based on how you're feeling. How do I feel today? How does every kilometer feel? When do I feel myself breaking down to where my running form isn't as crisp? When is the fatigue starting to affect me? And then, maybe it's not completely stopping your run, but maybe it's going for like doing a bit of walking.
Yeah, so I think
focusing on your breath, like make it intuitive so that you self-restrict yourself from pushing beyond the point where you're actually running correctly.
Yeah, because in those first 6 to 8 weeks anyways, it takes that amount of time to actually start building up like structural tissue tolerance, right? As we know from all the studies. So that's probably a good window, those first 6 to 8 weeks. Again, it can change, it'd be slightly less, slightly more, but to just kind of look at it as building your base in those first 6 to 8 weeks.
Yeah.
Don't even be concerned about how much you're running. Be concerned about how much should I be running based on how I'm feeling and based on if I'm ready for it. So the intuitive nature in it, and that's a good time to build that base up.
You could hardly run at all in those first 6 to 8 weeks and actually be putting in extremely beneficial work in just building, like you said, the base of the pyramid, right? The base of the pyramid is a baseline level of tissue tolerance with your springs, right? Like we'll talk about using programming skipping as a way to kind of build robustness in your springs. Strength, a baseline level of strength. Mobility is this huge one. And it's a weird one because when you get someone to understand the importance of mobility, right? The importance of their hardware moving like it should in order to actually exhibit optimal running technique. When people are running a lot of mileage or when they're quote unquote in season, they pay attention to having a mobility practice. But I think for some people, it seems like, you get a patient in after the winter and then you get them in, you're like, let's see what your squat looks like. And it's like they totally forgot that joint hygiene was important when they weren't running. And it's getting the point across that like, okay, what you're doing outside of running is actually some of the most important stuff when it comes to being a good runner.
Yeah.
So having a mobility practice.
Exactly. And we'll get to that. Like the biggest thing I would say, first pointer that we're trying to get across is that start slow and we need to build up from the base, right? During that time, don't think about mileage. Think about building that base up and developing that tissue tolerance. Now, the skipping that might be a great thing to do while you're trying to build this base up. Because like you say, it might not be, maybe you do less mileage on the road, but you start to do a little bit more things like skipping, like even like barefoot skipping in the gym or around your house or whatever, just to start building up that Achilles capacity. That could be maybe a nice implementation. So you're not out there running every single day. You're doing something like that to kind of help with that base.
And hopping and skipping, don't get us wrong. We don't just mean with a skipping rope. Like in the seminar, we do that spring tuning section where we do like this gradual progression from very, very easy, low impact, low amplitude hopping all the way up to like as high as you can, double leg hops. So you can, around the house, like if you have 30 seconds, if you're cooking something and you want to take a little break, just hop up and down for 30 seconds. Time yourself. You can do intervals of 5 sets of 30 seconds of hopping at whatever your tolerance is at and just build up that tolerance. Get your body used to the fact that, okay, these, my giant springs and elastics that we, Achilles tendons are designed to absorb and store energy and re-release it. Teach your body how to build up a tolerance so it's capable of doing that when you actually go out for a run. You don't feel like someone sliced both your calves in half.
Exactly. Invest in a skipping rope because it's a good training tool. It's probably one of the more applicable training tools specifically for building that tolerance up and for running. The other thing would be just consider doing walk-run combos. Doesn't even matter. You could have run a marathon and taken the winter off Start with walk run combos again.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Don't let it be an ego thing where you just want to start right off the bat and get into it. I know that's what I do. Like, you just want to see how you respond to it. And then it's like anything. If I take even a month off of I don't really do that, but if I took like a couple of weeks off of the gym and I went back and did like a heavy squat deadlift workout, I know I'm not gonna be able to walk for like a week. And probably best to maybe note that. And because I've had that many times,
Yeah.
if I tried to max out after that time, I destroy myself. So what I typically do now is just get a couple of workouts in to build the base back up, like anything. So you just do some light,
pattern grouping
light stuff, some body weight stuff, some light kettlebell stuff. Get a couple workouts in. You probably still feel it a little bit, like anything. If you're starting fresh again, you'll still feel it. But you don't want to blow yourself out the first time back because you're not used to it.
Everyone seems to do that. They go out for a run. They're like, people just assume that's another thing too. People just assume the first run always is going to suck, or the first like 2 weeks of training is always going to suck. Well, FYI, it doesn't have to.
Yeah,
it means you did too much too soon, and no one ever looked back and did something over 8 weeks, and blew themselves out on the first week or two, versus progressed up gradually. No one ever looked back and thought that blowing themselves out in the first 2 weeks was a good idea. Just be patient,
and you're going to feel
nothing
something
to lose.
Like, you're going to feel something from starting, but again, don't make it put the brakes on, because what happened, I've had that many times. You do that crazy leg workout and then you can't walk, and then you can't train for another like week aggressively. So then it's like,
so you missed out.
That actually puts you on halt, whereas I could have gotten a few more workouts in if I just took it more the right way. So that's kind of, I think that's the first point, is just abiding by more of that like specific adaptation to impose demand principle, SAID principle, starting to build that base up and just forgetting about the mileage at the start, and just kind of take yourself back to the person who's just starting out. Have that mindset of I'm just starting again. Let's look at the long term. Let's just get a few runs under my belt. I don't care what I did. Let's just get back to the basics and just listen to my body and be intuitive with it, see how I respond to these first few runs, and then either ramp up, keep it status quo, or again, ramp down a little bit, keep recovered, ramp up again. So it's just always just finding that balance where I feel I'm overtraining, right? I feel like maybe you shouldn't go for that run just because it says so on your schedule, or just because you told yourself you should. If you're feeling like shit, and if you're in pain after like the first few runs. So, and
even like, okay, underlying principle. This is like, we're talking about the base of the pyramid in terms of training, but under the foundation of that whole pyramid, if you're a runner and you want to run sustainably and you want to run for the rest of your life, and you're seriously committing to the sport or the activity of running, become informed about running, right? Read about it. People like, there's really smart people out there talking about running. Jay Deshary, Brian McKenzie, Nicholas Romanov, they all have books, and all those books are not geared towards the health professional or some, they simplify running and understanding the movement of running, understanding different theories and different takes on training, on strengthening that you have to do as the base of your pyramid. If you understand running better, you will be a better runner, right? Like, you just have more data to go based on and to shape your training in a way that's more sustainable. So just learn about running and self-experiment too. Like, try something. Don't be afraid to try things and be patient. And I think that's a common theme in all those guys' books, is just be patient. Like, don't rush things, and be informed about how you should be shaping your training. Don't do it the old school way of, the way back when, where we had this cookie cutter approach to running where all runners are supposed to train this way. It's like, that's old stuff. And a lot of people are still training with those principles in mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. So I think that's a good time to switch to the next thing that we want to talk about, is like focusing on the skill of running this season. So if you're starting fresh this season, or if you're a new runner, really take that info. So looking a little bit deeper into the technique of running, all of these principles that can help you along and be so you can be more of a pain-free, injury-free, sustainable runner over time. So I think it's
performance too. Like, you will run faster, you will run more efficiently if you are better at the skill of running.
In the long run, you're going to be better at running if you do it properly. It's like weightlifting or anything. Like, if you take the sport of weightlifting, those who practice technique and really get a base will end up, if you looked at like a graph, they're just going to slowly outpace over time the person who just tries to max snatch and clean right off the bat and has no fundamentals of technique. If they don't get injured along the way, their technique's going to limit them at some point because they don't have something in place. They either don't have the mobility, the technique.
They're guaranteed
They just
to get
haven't
injured.
put in the reps over time, the slow practicing reps over time that's allowed them to build a base to which that base allows them to perform at a high sustainable level over time. So I think that's what, and that's basically, you could look at any skill or any sport, anything like that, and it's those who drill the fundamentals right off the bat and slowly build up over time with that long-term mindset as opposed to a short-term mindset. They get the furthest and don't break down the most.
Yeah, and when another thing we talk about in our seminar is like the human form as it is currently today is really very similar to the human form. Well, it's the same in terms of hardware that it was 10,000 years ago, right? So the human body has perfected these kind of parts, right? Let's call it specialized parts, machinery in our body that have evolved to allow us to be the best endurance running machines on the planet. But you can only take advantage of millions of years of evolution to refine these parts to perfect them for endurance running if you have a body that reflects what a body was supposed to be like way back when. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So if you have a hip that can't extend and you have ankles that don't dorsiflex, you are no longer capable of exhibiting the running form that takes advantage of those, specialized parts that we've evolved to run. And I think just kind of, the mismatch between what we do with our bodies now, and one element of that is footwear, right? We're not going to talk a lot about footwear because I think anyone that listens to this knows our opinion of footwear. And the Cole's notes on footwear and running is, at the end of the day, how you run is the most important, but don't underestimate how much the shoes that you wear on your feet can affect how you run. Mm-hmm. Daniel Lieberman said it like that, and that was so crisp, no fat, and it's so true. If you wear shoes, yes, you can run with good technique with cushioned shoes, but the average person is allowed to heel strike and is allowed to run in a way that's very strange when they put a cushioned shoe on, and that could be the biggest kind of element that allows you to continue running and exhibiting that poor technique. When we talk about if you take your shoes off and you run barefoot or you run in a shoe with no heel cushioning and with a flat sole, you're no longer afforded the luxury of heel striking and running shitty.
That's the thing.
Right?
And that I would argue is...
And doesn't mean you're ready to run in that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't let you run poorly.
And that would be probably a good way to help build your base up. And whether you choose, it all depends. It all depends on what your goals are and how long you're going to be, how much you're going to be running, and what if you're going to be competing and all of that.
But everyone's goal should be to be a better runner, right? To exhibit more optimal running technique.
I think that's the main point of what we're talking about now, is that maybe this is a good time, especially if you're starting new or starting fresh after a season off. Maybe it's a good time to really make it this season you prioritize the skill of it and the technique of it. Or just looking at all of these things from a kind of an outsider perspective and a well-rounded perspective, so you can make yourself, maybe it's the season you say, I'm not gonna get hurt this season, right? I'm not going to, I'm going to be healthy, and I'm going to be able to not run through, I don't want to be running through pain this season. Maybe that's a
possible,
good goal.
FYI, for every single person listening to this.
That's the thing. So, or I'm going to listen to my body better this season. So that's, I think these are some things that maybe a lot of people forget about, and they're just kind of confused about. Or maybe it is the season that you want to transition to more of a minimalist style shoe. That is another good goal, especially it's easier to start kind of fresh doing that, as opposed to like your mid-run season, you're training for like a marathon halfway through it. Probably not the best time to start thinking about transitioning right then. If you've built up this base with a specific shoe, it's just going to increase the loading going through your lower extremity. Maybe you're not ready for that yet. You have to build it up again. So
the only caveat to that would be that same runner. Yes, maybe that's not the right time, but if that person's running through pain, it's always a good time to switch to better footwear and to focus on the technique of running. Because, okay, what is it really the end of the world? Are you going to look back when you're 70 and say, I'm glad I trained for that marathon through pain, and now I have a knee that has a hole in it? Like,
it's not going to happen in, that's kind of,
but it's part of that whole process, right?
Yeah.
It's like decide to move better, because it costs you over time. Like, it's really, being a good runner or training for running should never come at the expense of a body that lets you move like you want to later in life. Running should never come at the expense of health. And for a lot of people,
it is. Being a good runner is is an example of good health
Mm-hmm.
because it requires a lot of stuff.
For sure.
So
You
I
want to
think
talk about that stuff now? Go into mobility.
Yeah, so I think this is another good thing to note if you're starting fresh this season is that we've talked about the running piece already. So building a base up for running, adding some other things that can help you build the tissue tolerance up, skipping, we talked about hopping, and then maybe looking at skill. But I think the other thing is what happens outside of running. So the things that you're doing outside of running, are they helping your running, or are they neutral, or are they hurting your running? So it depends. Now we could go off track into all the lifestyle things like the way your office is set up and all that, but even just take it more specifically to your training. Are you doing things in your training outside of your specific running that are helping you? And that could be both mobility training and strength training. Let's talk about that. So mobility training, first of all, what are you doing? Do you have the prerequisite mobility? Do you have the mobility that you feel like you should have or that you should objectively have to run? If you don't, are you working on it? Or if you do have it, are you doing things to just maintain it? So just that joint hygiene, just maintaining tissue health, joint mobility over time.
Because it is like it's an ongoing, once you have it, it's not game over. Like once you have it, it's easier to maintain once you've got it than it is to achieve it.
Yeah.
But once you have it, it's not like, okay, perfect, I'm good, I'm done. It's like in 2019, it's a constant battle to maintain optimal mobility when we have so many things deeply ingrained into society. We talked about that before. So you need to have a joint hygiene program. You need to have hard screens that you can be honest with yourself and check and say, oh, geez, I'm tight today because I can't achieve this position.
Check, recheck the positions, right. and then just work on it as needed. Again, offset the other things that might be going against your running specific mobility in this case. So maybe like the sitting 8 hours you do at your office, that's probably a big thing that's affecting your running specific mobility. Yeah. So what are you doing to just prepare your body outside of running to allow you to run so you can focus on the running and the skill of running and the tissue tolerance of running without having these other things that might be hampering your running? So I think that if you have your mobility, do things to just constantly just check it, keep it.
Explore it on a daily basis.
Do other things. Maybe it's your own thing. Maybe you do, you can, like strength training and mobility kind of go hand in hand too. But maybe you just make a habit at night in doing some recovery work, because it's both kind of maintaining joint mobility and also just kind of that down regulation piece too. So just maintaining like your overall, like making sure your tissues aren't getting too hot or you're not overloading yourself and you're recovering well. And again, you can go into like off track again into like the sleep, nutrition, all the other things that you're doing in your life. Are they helping your running or are they not helping your running? But just to keep it a bit more specific.
And everyone should try and work towards being their own independent barometer of how their body's doing. Like you shouldn't have to go to your physical therapist or your doctor and say like, how are my joints doing? How are my muscles doing? You
might have to at first.
Too much soreness, or is this, like the goal should always be to get better at feeling your body and knowing when you're doing too much, when you need to ramp up the recovery side, when you need to take a day or two off running. Mm-hmm. Like, yes, you're right. Initially, you might have to consult someone and have them give you advice on understanding those paths, but eventually it's like, our goal in the clinic is always make people more independent, right? Always make them better able to troubleshoot their body with the little things, because every single day of training is essentially an experiment to see whether you did too much or too little, or whether you got more in the tank, or whether you need to focus on recovery elements. So get better at understanding when you need to prioritize what.
That's the thing. And like, it was interesting. Just a little side note is that I was watching this program, this is like documentary on the 4 runners. I've mentioned it before, who were trying to break the 2-hour marathon.
Yeah, I watched that. It was good.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. But one of the guys who was saying that his in like cardio and endurance was not what was limiting him. It was his speed and technique. So he actually couldn't maintain the actual speed. He was working all these like kind of sprinting style drills and stuff because he's like, I can run for days. It's not that's limiting me. So you can apply that same concept to whatever, like maybe endurance is not what you need to work on. Maybe it is more the mobility that you need to prioritize, or maybe it's your technique that's the biggest factor. So maybe you choose like, what is the biggest thing that I want to work on? Or maybe it is the endurance. Maybe you have everything and it's like, no, I literally need to build a bigger gas tank. That could be it too.
Yeah.
But whatever it happens to be, there's always going to be some like low hanging fruit where it's like, this is getting in the way of the other things that are allowing me to run. So I should work on that first, or at least work on it at the same time as I do the other things, and really just don't forget about it. Because a lot of people just want to forget about the things that they can't really do, and they just go with the things they can. They're like, well, I can run 10Ks, let's just keep running 10K, that's cool. But they just forget about the other stuff.
And it is a challenge too. Like it's that rate, whatever you just said, that rate limiting step. There's always one thing that is the rate limiting step, so that all the other stuff, it doesn't matter if you train them, that one thing is holding you back. That rate limiting step is dynamic, because as soon as you work on that, maybe now that goes into the ladder to where that's no longer the priority rate limiting step, right? So it's getting good. And that's what I said with, being informed about running, reading books. It gives you a better idea on how to determine how to feel, or how to just kind of understand what is my rate limiting step right now. What things can I do to test what my rate limiting step is?
Exactly. And I think, again, one more cross reference to like weightlifting, is that you'll see a lot of people, it's always technique. And then at some point, once people drill technique enough, then it's like, okay, well, now we need strength. And you'll see these weightlifters just doing like pure squat regimens for a while. And they're like, I just need to build my actual strength up. Yeah. And that's kind of like the cardio, but they do it the right way. They're like, let's build technique, and then we'll think about building the endurance on top of that in the form of strength in this case.
Runners do it the opposite way.
Runners do it the opposite way. Let's think about endurance first, and then maybe we break down, and then we have to think about technique. So I think just flipping that on its head, because endurance is always, it's easy to, like, it's never easy, but it's easier to get endurance. It's harder to get technique. Like, right. I could plop you on an assault bike and get you to do intervals, and that would actually help your endurance in running too. I could get you to do cardio in different forms that don't even involve running, and that would build your gas tank up. It's not just a gas tank thing. So I think that should be almost the last thing we look at, not the first thing we look at. Yeah,
like if you were working on your gas tank, but you're in a car, okay? You have a car that's not driving very well. It seems to run out of gas super, super quickly. And all you're doing is refilling that gas tank, or trying to work on, oh, shit, my car's not getting good mileage. I got to put in, instead of a 50-liter tank, I'm going to put in a 100-liter tank. But all your wheels are out of alignment, and that's why your car's moving inefficiently.
Or it's the way you're driving it. You just gun it on every, right? So it's the way you're driving the car.
Exactly. Take a look back and say, like, is it really putting in a bigger gas tank is that really the thing I need to do right now? Or do I need to focus on, oh shit, one of my tires isn't even moving, and that's why I'm so inefficient. I could just change that tire, and that 50-liter tank almost feels like it drives like a 200-liter tank now.
Well, that's the other thing, because like the skill and efficiency you have will actually allow for a more efficient use of that gas tank anyways. So It will help you build that gas tank in the end.
And when it comes to technique, Jay Deshairy says it well, form follows function. So if you try and change the way you run, your running technique, without changing how the parts move, you're not really going to get anywhere, right? Like how you run is an expression of the mobility you have available. So one of the easiest ways to change how you run is change the mobility you have access to, right? Yeah. Change your environment to facilitate changing that mobility. Change your footwear so that you are forced to change how you run. Work on your hip extension. Then you just have literally more propulsion and more room to express a different running technique. So I think, changing technique, a lot of it has to do with, taking away things that allow you to use a poor technique, or changing your body so that you're actually being allowed to exhibit a different technique. So mobility is a big one. And like you said, it's what are you doing outside of running, and is it helping or hindering you, right? Do you have a joint hygiene routine where you're working actively on building the mobility that you need to have in order to express good running technique, efficient injury demoting running technique, right? So I think that's the big rate limiting step for a lot of people, because it's, like we said, it's that constant battle, and I don't think people understand how big of a battle it is to maintain mobility. Like, you don't sit very much, right? No. And you work on mobility on a daily basis, right?
Yeah.
Same with me. And it's like, we don't even sit that much, and we find it's hard to, like, you need to be consistent.
I think I take that for granted, because I often get asked that, like, how much per day do you work on this? And then but you just forget about how much little things you do all the time. Like I'm just antsy right now, so like pulling your like whatever, you pull your leg up, and then
Exactly.
so you're doing little things all day, and then you're in the clinic showing people mobilizations or showing people exercises. That's all stuff. So throughout the day, it's just kind of constant, and we're lucky that we have a workplace and the ability to do this. So it's not like it's like, oh yeah, well, it's like the classic thing that you're a trainer, so you can work out all day. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, not everyone would have that luxury, but you can do little things all day to help it out, and you can set yourself up in a much better way to help promote that, even if your job isn't showing people mobility.
And it's not black and white. It's like you can switch to a standing desk. Are you prioritizing that? Yeah, it's harder for you to be able to stand and not sit at work, but it's still possible. It just involves a tiny bit more work. Mm-hmm. It's like people see these things as hard barriers when really they're not. We always tell people, if you break down sitting into optional, non-optional, sitting at work is optional because your boss or your employer cannot force you to put your body in a shitty position that we know is terrible for you. They cannot force you to do that.
No,
okay,
exactly.
They might make it difficult for you to engineer an environment that gets you out of that, but you can take some crappy milk crate and put it on top of your desk and create your own. I always tell people, the uglier and shittier your standing desk creation is, the more likely your workplace is going to buy you one, right? But don't look at these things as hard barriers. Hard, like non-optional sitting, there really isn't that much in that column at the end of the day. Vehicles, if you have a lot of commuting, that's one of them, because I don't know of a car you can stand in yet. But a lot of these things that people see as, oh, I have to sit because of X, it's like, well, do you? Are you? You can change that if you want to. It's not. I'm not saying it's just like flick your fingers and it's changed. But if it's important enough to you, which it should be, you can modify that.
Exactly. So I think one of the final things to maybe touch on is that now it comes down to, we've built our base app. So after the base, maybe decide like, what are your goals with running? Is your goal to train for a specific race? And then if so, I think that just taking society's perception of the different random arbitrary race distances that we've created, just like choosing like, what do you want to do? And then what is a good goal for me? And then how should I progress towards that goal? And again, you can, if your goal is to just go all out, like let's put yourself in, like if you had to run for your life, I could probably run like an ultra marathon if my life depended on it, even though I'm not ready for it, right? If somebody's like, somebody's dying or your family's dying, you need to go, like I would be able to run.
Yeah.
I would get there somehow. I'd probably walk along the way, run, but I would finish probably an ultramarathon. I might die along the way, but
you'd probably be, if you succeeded, you'd be broke down.
My body would be, and I'd understand that, but I would understand also that the reason why I went this crazy is because I wanted to save my family or whatever, right? Yeah. So now that's an extreme example, but we can cut the example down to your race. So,
but I feel like a lot of people, are like, okay. You get these people too. I know you do. There's a military like charity 10K. And someone that never runs, that sits at a desk all day, is like, you know what, in 3 weeks I'm going to do the 10K.
That's what I'm talking about.
And you look at them, you're like, oh my Lord. Like, do you run? Have you ever run? No. But I'm going to do it because my sister's doing it or something like that. And she's a runner. So she asked me if I could do it with her. It's like, you do understand that running is a skill, and you don't even have the hardware prerequisites to do that. And they're like, yeah, but I want to do it. It's a goal.
Yeah.
It's almost like they prioritize. You're like, even if you
as long as they're aware. So the big thing is like, it's not that they can't, like, that's fine, but just know, like, first of all, keep all the principles in mind. You might have to walk a lot during these things, whatever your distance you choose, but maybe it's better to look at a more like feasible distance based on what you specifically can or can't do in the training that you do.
Yeah.
But again, or you make the executive decision saying like, okay, well, this might, based on that, it's out of what I probably should be doing, so that's okay. So I'm either really going to pace myself, or I'm going to be okay with the fact that it might, I might have to recover for a few weeks after this. It might put me back, and that's fine. Again, it's based on that it's just based on what you're aware of and what you're comfortable with, or what you're willing to accept in terms of, because like there's this weird thing if you take like more of the there is that aspect of it. The ultra runner community, Ironmans, there is almost like the punishment aspect that actually drives them towards it. So that's not something that we want to necessarily affect, because a lot of those people are well aware that they feel like death for like a week after their races.
Yeah.
And they're also a lot of, maybe some of them, maybe not others, but they're also aware that's not necessarily good for you. I think a lot of people understand that if you can't walk for days and like you're, it feels like your legs are broken, like probably not good for your body.
But some people think that that's part of running. That's like all we're trying to do is make sure they
like
have all the information to make a good decision.
I'm talking about like the crazy Ironman ultra marathon.
But those are
kind
the
of
exception.
No,
right?
exactly. But that's what I'm saying. Like you can use the exception and scale it down to make an example of other things that are less extreme. So you can take that and say like, okay, well, the person who hasn't run, if they're running a half marathon or like a 10K even, just kind of know these things. Just have all these things in your mind so that you can make a good decision and not be kind of flabbergasted when you sustain maybe a potential injury or whatever it is along the way. So I think the biggest point we're trying to make is pick what. Do you want to even compete at all? Maybe you don't, because a lot of runners just do the competition thing because, again, maybe they want to, but maybe they're just like, oh, well, that's, I guess, what you should do as a runner, like sign up for a race. Maybe you don't want to compete and just be honest with yourself and be like, I want to run because I like running, and that's cool too. Then it makes it easier, because then it's like, well, I'm just going to go based on how much I can naturally get out of myself as I progress slowly. So.
And making that fork is like, are you running to compete, or are you running for health or for the enjoyment of running?
Yeah. Or is it both? So is it, I think the biggest thing we're trying to make is choose what your goals are. Is it competition? Is it health? Is it both? Is it because I just like running? And then tailor your training to it, and then make realistic expectations on yourself based on what you choose. And maybe you want to run a marathon, but maybe this isn't the year to do it. Maybe it's the year that you start. Maybe a marathon is feasible in like 2 years or maybe 3 years even, as you just slowly build up that tolerance. And then maybe you can keep doing marathons because you did it the right way, as opposed to doing a marathon, getting injured for half the year, which I've seen many, many times. We're just being honest here. And then you can't do marathons for a long time and you want to, right? So it's just a matter of like,
and not only can you not do marathons, but like walking is now uncomfortable.
Yeah, I've seen that too. So just... I think just planning and structuring and looking at long-term as opposed to short-term, and deciding what you want to do with the running.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that run for health reasons or run because they enjoy running, if they do it the right way, those people become the people that end up wanting to run for competition, where they're like, okay, now I want a bit more of a challenge. I've made sure I put everything in place to be able to develop a sustainable running technique. I'm not overtraining. I was patient because I didn't have this competition goal. But now that I'm in a good place and I see myself building capacity and being able to run, with only the mindset of running within my tolerance and within my abilities, I see myself increasing distances. Now I want to challenge myself for time. And that's a good way to come about it. But I think, the tendency when there's a competition on the line is to rush things, And those are, this perpetual carousel of, ooh, this kind of hurts. This doesn't feel so good today. I actually have to bring back my training because I'm injured right now. It's so crazy how many runners are getting injured. And like you said, It's not about telling them what to do. It's about informing them so they can make a better decision about how to regulate their own training, right? Because half the time they go and see a health professional or a doctor and they're being given shitty advice. Like they're not being given good advice because you're not going, number one, you're often not going to someone that understands movement, that understands a baseline level of knowledge about the technique of running.
It's usually
that
like
can give you helpful advice.
It's like a dual. It's either like people just want should I run? Should I keep running or no? It's either like I stop running or I keep running. But there's no like, okay, well, let's look a little deeper than that. So because they'll
shouldn't be that binary.
No. So yeah, I think all these factors play a part in the way you look at running. Maybe you are a runner. Maybe you're new to it, but just keep these things in mind over time, right? So I think they can help you a lot, and make sure if you want to be serious with running, then make sure everything is kind of helping you that you do outside of running, and that you're preparing yourself the best way so you can compete at the level you want to compete at. And if you just like running because you like running, great. That's a lot of people. It's like their meditation, and it's like the one thing they like to do. But I would argue that maybe you should do things outside of that so you can keep doing that as your meditation over time, because a lot of people, when running's taken away from them, they feel like shit, and they're like, that was the only thing that kept me sane. Now I can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, it always comes down to let's make this a sustainable thing if you like it, right?
Well, let's talk about some running red flags. Okay, so running red flags are things that would be an easy indicator for you to see that you really need to reevaluate how you're moving and shift towards focusing on the skill of running and other background stuff you need to do, whether it's mobility work or tissue tolerance or whatever, to say, I need to work on something, I need to change something. Okay, maybe, and in that category is perhaps switching to more minimal footwear to allow you to get kind of guided towards better running technique. So running red flags. Do you get injured regularly every year when you run?
Yeah.
That's a running red flag.
Or do you develop pain as a part of your running season? Like,
Yeah.
do you start during the running season? Do you get back pain? Do you get knee pain? Or do you get pain starting? And is it related to your running? So that's
number one.
Yeah.
Number two, do you find yourself always having to take Advil or Tylenol? You know, and that's pretty in line with the whole pain thing. It's like, you shouldn't be taking anti-inflammatories like Chiclets. Some people take them before a run because they know they're going to be in pain after a run. That's a big red flag.
yeah.
Another red flag. Can you take your shoes off with nothing on your feet and go down with hip width apart and do a comfortable squat and achieve a comfortable squat position that you could hold for a minute? If you can't, that's a running red flag.
Yeah.
And that doesn't tell you exactly what the problem is, but it says, you know, it's either your ankles are so tight that you can't do that, your hips aren't mobile enough, or your brain doesn't know, it doesn't have the software to help you be able to get down to a squat, all of which are problems and will materialize in running, even though running is not the exact squat position. Another running red flag. Can you balance on one leg for a minute without falling over or without feeling like you're about to fall over every second?
I was going to say, like, what's your single leg stability like? But even further than that is, like, what's your single leg strength like? Just baseline. What's your lunge look like? Or what's your, like, you know, even mini single leg squat look like? So just what is your strength running specific strength look like? And that's going to help you or hinder you depending on what that looks like.
Yeah.
So if you can't control your knee in space with like a single or a few lunges, then that's going to be a little bit of a red flag for the running season.
Yeah, and I think a good goal is for eventually, you know, TFC is going to eventually start putting out more YouTube content, because when we say, what's your single leg control like, a lot of times people listening to this will be like, I have no idea what to look for, what not to look for. They could do a super ugly mini single leg squat and be like, oh yeah, this feels pretty good. You know, so I think being able to give, you know, my goal with those red flags was like, people know either it's like, if you balance on one leg, if you can't do it, that's a problem. And that's like binary. It's either I can do it or I can do it, or I can do it or I can't do it rather. And, you know, eventually we want to expand that, and even doing like a basic squat video and saying, okay, barefoot bodyweight squat, feet hip width apart, parallel. These are the things to look for. If you can't do this, maybe you can go down this road. Maybe you can try this. And like giving people like a troubleshooting video for their squat, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, I can't do a squat. That's a red flag. How do I now work on it? So a big goal with over time, as we have more resources, it will be to ramp up the content, where it's like we could even have a running specific section where we help people, you know, these are helpful drills, these are helpful progressions, all that kind of stuff. Because I think the audio stuff is good, but it doesn't tell the whole story of being able to help people understand, okay, I know this now, but what do I do?
Exactly.
So anyway, hopefully that gives everyone a kind of a fresh perspective. Like I said, we're coming at this from the standpoint of people in Canada. Winter's about to be over. A lot of people are going to be getting back outside, running higher mileage, getting back to their running. And, you know, it's this, if you are that runner in a place where we have seasons and you don't run as much in the winter, every single year is an opportunity to basically revisit. And, you know, even if it's just sitting down and for like 5 minutes and be like, okay, what are my goals in terms of running this year? My goal, you know, like you said, maybe your goal is not get injured. That's a good goal. Mm-hmm. And it's within your grasp and within your control. You know, what are things I need to prioritize? How do I get better at figuring out what that rate limiting step is? You know, how do I develop and pattern in some joint hygiene, like a mobility routine that carries through the entire year for the sake of health, but within the running season for the sake of being able to express optimal running technique or optimal running form? Is my footwear affecting how I run? Because it very well may be. And then the SAID principle, like just being patient, building a tolerance, starting with intuitive running, where you just go based on how you feel and not based on what a piece of paper says you should be doing. And you know, a skipping regimen, and just kind of like a baseline strength regimen, because these are all things that tie into making you a better runner long term. And take a long term viewpoint.
Yeah.
Right? Like we always talk about that. Everyone's always short term, the next race or whatever. It's like, well, maybe you just think long term so that you can be a good runner and continue running for the rest of your life and don't have to stop because your kneecaps don't have cartilage in them anymore.
Exactly.
So, anyway, we hope you guys enjoyed that podcast. Got some good info, and we'll catch you next week.